The old saying goes that Australia rode on the sheep's back, and Australia's strong wool industry is the legacy of that history.
Australia produces around 24%, about a quarter of the world's wool. But not all wool is the same, and so we produce about 60% of the world's apparel wool, so that's the wool used for clothing. We produce about 90% of the world's fine apparel wool, which is the sort of stuff that can be worn next to the skin with confidence. So we are the global leaders in production of fine apparel wool.
With the sheep industry contributing more than $4 billion annually to the Australian economy, and the value of a sheep increasing on average 8% each year since the turn of the century, there's no doubt it's an industry with a bright future. However, despite growing demand worldwide for both sheep meat and wool, the total herd has been in decline as farmers battle with an exploding population of wild dogs. Since the mid-90s, sheep numbers in Australia have halved. And in Queensland in particular, which was once our largest producing state, numbers are down to 20% of what they once were.
It's an insidious problem that has grown. In parts of Australia, it's grown to be such an issue that it forces people out of the business and it's destroying regional communities.
The Tambo Blackall Shire is a prime example of just how hard hit some of these regional communities have been. Central Queensland was once the heart of the wool industry in Australia, where in the 1920s the labour unions were formed in the shearing sheds. But now the sheds are merely a tourist attraction, as predation from dogs has forced almost all producers to either leave the land or go into cattle production. What makes the situation worse is that sheep are much better suited to the country. So not only do they employ more people, they also fare better when water is scarce.
If you've got good feed, you can always run cattle, but there's the irony of it. The sheep are much more resistant to drought than cattle are. And you can, many more people could survive a drought with sheep and just a bit of cutting a bit of branches off trees and things like that, and a bit of fodder and a bit of supplement. Had to be a really bad drought before you destocked.
Lansdowne is one of Australia's historic and best-known sheep properties, consisting of more than 150,000 acres of prime sheep grazing country. But in recent years, wild dogs have had a devastating impact on the company's flock. Andrew Turnbull, whose family has a long history at Lansdowne, has seen firsthand the devastation wild dogs have caused.
Down here at Lower Lansdowne last year, they joined 4,990 odd ewes, marked 990 lambs and only weaned about 50 lambs that they were just decimated by dogs. And the destruction's anything from seeing them with their backside chewing out or their stomachs trailing out.
2 properties down, over at Rumley, run by Peter Sargood and his family, the dogs have completely driven them out of sheep.
We had to shift their whole enterprise over to the cattle side then, and we've looked at going back into sheep, but it just wasn't feasible while we had the dog numbers around. You just can't run sheep on the off chance of saying that oh, there's no dogs, because they will turn up, you know, and they can do a lot of damage in such a short time. It's really heartbreaking.
In the middle part of the 20th century, leaseholders were required to keep up dog and rabbit fencing infrastructure, but much of the original barrier fencing has now gone to ruin. Farmers are again realising that exclusion fencing may in fact be the solution, and are forming cluster groups to fence large areas of grazing land.
Our main aim was to try and control the movement of dogs in, so that a lot of us could get back into sheep grazing, which was their predominant source of income.
In the heyday of the wool industry in the late 80s, Australia had in order of 180 million sheep. Today that number sits around 70 million. And along with drought and price conditions, dogs have had a large part to play in that decline. And whilst Australia still has the best genetics for merino sheep in the world, in order to meet growing demand from emerging economies, the wild dog threat needs to be addressed.
It's so important, not only to individual growers in terms of their profitability, but to regional communities and in fact the fabric of Australia.
And a look back in history with a return to fencing out feral animals might just provide the solution and help ensure a bright future for Australia's sheep industry.